Okay, I kind of want to let you drive this conversation because I guess you brought up the topic. Are you a theist? Are you there?
Yeah. Weird.
Well,
Uh,
tell me about your position on God before we get started.
so I just like start off just kind of preface. I am by no means a biblical scholar or a theologian, anything like that. I'm your kind of average guy. Um, the way I see it, it's yes to kind of preface. It's like I believe in Christianity. It's the religion that like I kind of hold to, and especially in my younger years, kind of grew up in the church as like as a background. Um, but as I got older, kind of figuring things out, and as you mature, you start to have a lot of doubts and conflictions, and kind of really want to seek out what you actually believe. Um, so in my process of kind of like going about and like finding my faith and kind of what I personally believe has been a lot of the same journey as kind of what I believe as a voluntarist and as a libertarian. Um, but one of my biggest things is I find, um, and as I said today, um, there's a distinct lack of people who actually hold themselves accountable um, to actually the beliefs in Christianity, like people who would call themselves Christians. There's a distinct lack of people holding themselves accountable to their beliefs, and I'm by no means perfect. But also that in my own personal view, I've seen a lot of similarities um, between like anarcho-capitalism and voluntarism um, that in Christianity, as far as my personal belief. Um, and those kind of basic beliefs are, hey, you should strive to do the right thing, but what is the right thing? And that it's different in a lot of people's eyes. And how do you go about practicing your beliefs without violating someone's rights, without violating the now? Um, and I see a lot of people use the Bible as essentially what I see as a scapegoat to say, hey, socialism is good, or like radical rightism or radical leftism is okay, and they use uh, the Bible to support that. Um, and one of the best examples as a counter argument I kind of have to offer is a podcast of is the anarcho-christian podcast. Um, Someone who's an ANCAP and a voluntarist who basically kind of breaks down uh, different theological arguments and stuff from the point of view of an ANCAP. And I find that one very inspiring and very liberating, um, just in my personal opinion. But I've also seen it as like I see a lot of not even just Christians, people that are have any kind of religious belief in general, when they come over to being a part of like more so of the liberty movement. Um, Definitely not ostracized by any means. Like I've met people of different faith and people who either don't believe in something, which is totally okay. It's a personal uh, relationship, in, at least in my opinion, um, and it's not something that you want to force on somebody. Because I mean, as we all believe, as kind of voluntarists and libertarians, that that force is innately evil in of itself. Um, but at the same time, being able to counter the argument of like, hey, you should be pro state, you should be pro socialism, um, when in actuality, that's not really kind of what the Bible teaches. It's like, yes, you should go out and help the poor, but the state shouldn't be forcing you to do that. yes, you should be a peacemaker. That doesn't mean like in, for instance, of the police, where you see like, because I've seen holsters before, and it's like the thin blue line flag, and it said, "Blessed are the peacemakers." It's like, well, you know, being violent and causing retribution is not being a peacemaker. Yes, you should be peaceful, um, but you are also allowed to defend yourself. That doesn't mean it's okay to go out and forcefully violate someone's rights. It's kind of where I'm kind of coming from.
Well, I appreciate that you're a voluntarist and that you don't want to force your ideas on anybody around you. And that's typically why I don't spend a lot of time on my channel talking about God. I've done a couple debates on God with other voluntarists that wanted to debate sort of the existence of God. I don't see it. Well, my perspective is I have yet to see sufficient evidence to show the existence of such an entity. But I also see just a ton of contradictions between the ideas of voluntarism, self-ownership, non-aggression, and all kinds of stuff in Christianity. In fact, I see so many contradictions that I have yet to be shown an argument that makes sense of one calling oneself an anarcho-christian. Those two things seem mutually exclusive and contradictory of one another. And we can get into that if you want.
Yeah, I'd be down. Where would you kind of like to start?
Well, I guess we'll start with what you just talked about, how it's important that we not force our ideas on each other. And then I can just immediately point to God and how he forces his ideas on me.
Okay.
So it's a non-consensual relationship being proposed with this entity. So even assuming he exists, which again I have definitely not seen sufficient evidence of. He. Have you heard the Euthyphro dilemma, or any of the other issues with the omniscience, omnibenevolent, and omnipotence of God? There's just some big contradictions there.
Somewhat. If you wouldn't mind kind of explaining the Euthyphro argument, because I don't think I've heard that.
Well, the Euthyphro argument has to do with the goodness of God, and it's a specific sort of dilemma, which means it can only be one of two options, and neither of the options are really good for God being good. So one option is that what God says is good because God says it is. So God chooses what is considered good and what is not considered good, in which case it's sort of just kind of arbitrary. It's just his opinion, and it's just imposed on us by fiat, which is just sort of yet another involuntary moral authority over us. The other option is that God says that something is good because of some outside source, some source of, some definition of what is good outside of God. In which case, God, being omnibenevolent, meaning all good, is bound by some rules that he's not in control of, that exist outside of him, which means that God is not all-powerful because he is restricted by whatever this outside source that defines good, which makes this outside source that defines good sort of more powerful than God, because it has the ability to control his actions and prevent him from being anything other than what this outside source of good is. So that's just one of many problems. I mean, we can, but we can talk about that if you want. We can talk about other contradictions just in general with theism, or we can maybe more specifically focus in on the contradictions specifically between anarchism and Christianity. So you can drive us wherever you'd like.
Yeah, I'd actually be more inclined to talk about the the contradictions between Christianity and anarchy. Um,
Okay.
Mostly because it's kind of a thing of, again, like, I don't want to force my beliefs on somebody. I like I said, I personally believe that if you actually want to follow the teachings of Christ, then, and again, like I said, that is completely up to the person. Then whether it's the Crusades or any kind of action like that, anytime you're forcing your belief upon someone, one, obviously you're violating the NAP, but it's inherently contradictory to what we believe.
Agreed.
So yeah,
But you're limiting your analysis to interactions between humans. I'm extending the analysis to include this God entity that imposes all manner of enforced, involuntarily, non-consensually enforced rules. Just off the top of my head, Leviticus 24 something, whoever blasphemes the name of the Lord shall be put to death. The whole community shall stone him. Deuteronomy, I forget totally what chapter and verse, something about if the tokens of virginity aren't there in a young woman, you should bring her out to the door of her father's house, and the men of the city shall stone her. Like, there is no shortage.
yeah.
And I could do this all day. Like, there is no shortage of just terrible NAP violating commands from this entity in the Bible. And so before we can even begin to go down that path, we have to start with the person I'm talking to, because there's so many different flavors. Like you said, you're a follower of Christianity, but that tells me almost nothing. Like, there are so many different flavors.
Okay, yeah.
You know, do you take the Bible literally, figuratively? How much of it do you think is true? Do you think it's the Word of God? You know, is it veracious in terms of you know, coming from God as His actual word? Like, where do you stand on all this?
So kind of to start off, like, for like in interpretation wise, as far as like a literal versus a interpretive kind of sense, I'd say it's honestly a combination of the two. There are certain things where it's like, okay, I can see how someone in, you know, 1,000, 2,000 years ago plus, could be limited by basically what their interpretation is. Because if you go by that what a Christian believes is that it is the inspired word of God, and you take that as a benchmark, then you have to also take into account, okay, what is the limitations, like the descriptive limitations of people of that time, which isn't a big part of it, but also you have to look at parables and like different kind of like allegorical stories that go along with it. So that is a huge part of it. For instance,
hold on. Let me challenge you. Like, was God not powerful enough to get translations down on paper through these people accurately? I mean, certainly He's omniscient, so that can't be an excuse for, you know, like he's omnipotent. Like, He could have written it Himself. So I don't see what you're saying as anything other than like arbitrary and subjective. Like, it just calls the whole book into question if we can pick which ones we take literally and which ones we take figuratively. You know, it just seems like, I mean, we're dealing with an omnipotent being here. Like, translation should not be a problem.
Yeah, and again, that's a very valid point. A lot of it is because it, at least, and then just kind of like the personal study that I've done, when you have to go deal with, like, yes, there's like the literal, like someone wrote down what God said as soon as, you know, He spoke to them, or there's like someone had a dream and God spoke to them in a dream, like that kind of thing. But also when I say kind of like translation and interpretation, you're not wrong. Like that is a very, very valid point. And I'm going to be honest, I don't entirely know the best way to answer that question. To be 100% honest with you, the way I would personally kind of answer it is, it's also a issue of, when I say interpretation, it's kind of, so you have Hebrew and it gets translated into Greek, which say gets translated into Latin, and so on and so forth, which I feel a lot of the time that's kind of where the interpretation and like translation kind of thing, a lot of it gets lost.
Well, why isn't he giving us updated copies? Like,
again,
another question would be, why did he pick like Bronze Age humanity to sort of insert his attempt at giving us how we need to live our life and the rules that we're going to be eternally tortured for breaking, whether or not we consent to them? Like, why did he pick 2,000 years ago? And what about the people that came before them? Like, why didn't he come earlier for those people? And why isn't he coming back now to give us an updated copy in English to clear up all these weird translations? Like, I mean, like, if we hold it to the evidentiary standards we would hold anything else, like, it just falls apart to me. Like, I'm not seeing it.
Yeah. You bring up a really good point. So when, to go back where you're saying, about like Leviticus and Deuteronomy, like basically like Old Testament law. So Christians are not held to Old Testament law. That should kind of be the kind of starting point of it.
Was God different then? So he wasn't always good? Why can't we hold him to the fire for that stuff?
I mean,
so to speak, hold him to the fire, so to speak.
And the thing is, you can. You absolutely can. It's your personal belief. That's why there's the kind of difference in law. So in Romans 10:4, it says Christ is the end of the law. And then in Colossians 12, 13, and 14, it says that God forgave all of our sins, having canceled the charge of our legal indebtedness, which stood against us and condemned us. He has taken away, nailing it to the cross. So the reason a lot of those laws were set into place in the first place is how people, they say like the old like fire and brimstone Old Testament kind of gospel, which is contradictory. Well, not even necessarily contradictory, but it's also more so negated by the actual teachings of Christ. And if you hold the belief that Christ is God, then you do actually, like, you have to answer, okay, why was this okay, but now it's not? And that's something that I've personally wrestled with a whole lot. And it's a thing of more so having chosen that lifestyle, because in a perfect world, obviously, no one should be forcing you into a certain belief.
Well, no, so, God is forcing me into a belief. That's my point. That's the conflict with anarchy. Like, you're not forcing me into a belief. That's why we can be friends. And luckily, I have not seen sufficient evidence that this God exists, so I'm not really worried about this as a problem. But, you know, it's an interesting conversation between the two of us, because you and I associate with a reciprocal voluntary agreement, which is why we're friends, right? And your beliefs really have no effect on me. So that's another reason why I'm super chill with the subject, and I don't go around trying to anti-evangelize or whatever, because as long as you're not trying to force it on me. But, you know, as long as we're in this conversation, the problem, the complaint that a voluntarist would have is that it's not you forcing this stuff on me. It would be your God forcing this stuff on me. Like, and here's one from the New Testament. He that believeth not shall be damned. That's in Mark. So, like, this sounds like a social contract. I didn't sign shit, said Spooner.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. And that's a big thing. And it's also, you have to look at, so God is also, when we talk about judgment and we talk about like what gets you into heaven, it's like, okay, yes, Christians believe that, belief and like kind of like dedicating your life and believing in Christ's sacrifice on the cross is kind of like the basis in our forgiveness of sins. But you're right, like you shouldn't be forced into some kind of social contract with God. But it's the same, I would argue, with almost any religion, just as in Christianity, of the fundamental fact is God isn't forcing you to believe something. It's like you can choose to, or you can choose not to, but he himself isn't forcing himself upon you.
Wait. Do you believe that there's like hell where I'm going to be like tortured for eternity? That's a pretty big gun pointed at me if I don't fall in line, right?
Yeah.
And just to make the full case clear, because, back when I was a Christian, I would have responded to what I just said by saying, well, it's his house. He doesn't have to let you in it. It's his property. Well, okay. But he also created literally everything, including me and all of the situations that led me to be an atheist and to not believe. He created all of that, all of those circumstances that made me who I am and brought me to where I am and led me to believe what I believe. He's responsible for all that. He created it. So for him to sort of create me and create the universe such that it is in a way that, according to rules that he also made up without my consent, sends me to hell for eternal torture. Wow, this is pretty effed up, man. Like,
yeah, it is a pardon the pun, but it is a hell of a conundrum.
Good one.
But no, so that's another part of, like, when you look at, say, for instance, Genesis and like what is original sin, and when everything is created, and like I said, like you know me, I'm a geology student, I'm a scientist, so it's like there's certain things about like creation where it's like, okay, I can see like a difference of interpretation versus literal interpretation with things like, say, the Big Bang, like evolution, like those kind of things. It's like scientifically I hold those to be true, but I also can reconcile them with my beliefs. So it's like, for instance, just kind of off topic, so let there be light, okay, the Big Bang, like that's how a lot of people that are Christian and scientists kind of live. And I think that's not to say that I'm special anyway, because I'm certainly not. But being a scientist and coming from my faith, not as, okay, what do you believe? Like that is a big part of it, but what do you know to be true? And what can you see that's provably true, and that kind of thing. But if you look at the beginning of the earth, and you talk about like Adam and Eve and that kind of thing, and the Garden of Eden, with like original sin, the one of my favorite quotes, I can't remember what movie it's from, but it's God gave us a great big apple tree, and he said not to touch it. Don't think about touching it. Don't talk about touching it. Just don't touch it. And because of that action, that's why there is sin. That's why there is that evil in the world. And that's why there has to be some kind of purging, essentially, not obviously on earth, but like later on. And it is a solid argument that, yes, it is his house, that you didn't have, like, he doesn't have to let you in. But it's also a thing of, okay, why is that the case? And that is the case of not necessarily because God was just like, hey, I'm going to damn everyone to eternity. It's because of the actions of humans um,
Hang
that
on.
we are.
Like, you got to let me challenge you on that. So a couple things.
Mhm,
Number one, he created the entire situation.
mhm,
And he created it with full power to create it differently and full
mhm,
foreknowledge of how it was going to turn out at the time he created it. So when at the moment he was deciding to create the universe, he knew that one of the first things that was going to happen was, if he created this thing called a human with all of its susceptibilities to temptation, such that it was going to eat off this tree that he told him not to. He created that with foreknowledge and the power to create it differently. So that's not, number one, the humans involved's fault.
mhm.
He created that situation specifically such that it is, with the knowledge of how it was going to work and the power to change it. If he's omnipotent and omniscient. Second, I have just, in the same way that my parents can't sign a contract on my behalf without my consent, so too can the sins of the father. Has nothing to do with me. I wasn't even alive, have 7,000 years ago or whatever. I don't know. The modern Christians are more in line with evolutionary theory, so I don't know what their timeline is now. I haven't caught up on it, but like, that has nothing to do with me. There's no moral justification that I can find that's consistent and sound that would lead me to, be tortured for eternity because some people ate a tree, ate some fruit of a tree,
Yeah. And again, that's for me personally. That's one of those things that is the base of that faith. So it's kind of, if you don't believe in it, then yes, personally, like, my belief is going to be different, and I think the outcome might be different. But again, it's less so. Okay, here's how I would put it. So, which this is probably not even the best way to actually describe this, but it's the best way I can in the moment kind of describe it. Um, so you're walking down the street, and there's a whole lot of traffic in the street, but you have, like, you want to cross the street, and you kind of have to cross the street. Um, no one's necessarily forcing you to cross the street and risk getting hit by a car. Um, and even with a certain, high degree, with all the traffic, you understand that you probably will get hit by a car if you cross the street. Um, but no one's, again, forcing you to do it. And if you don't believe you have to get to the other side, there's no reason for you to cross the street. Does that kind of? I know that's probably a really weird way of saying it. Um,
Yeah, I guess I lost the thread. What does that have to do with? I'm trying to keep it centered around that question of, voluntarism versus Christianity, and if anything negative happens to me in a situation in which I haven't hurt anyone, or broken any rules that I didn't consent to being bound by, then it seems, which I think we both agree is part and parcel of a lot of the stuff in Christianity, that it is incompatible with voluntarism. It's incompatible with consent, right?
yeah, and the way I reconcile it is because it's one of those things of, if you take it to be true and you feel, say, personally convicted by that, then that is your personal conviction. Um, Same with how people argue, uh, the whole idea. It's like, well, what about people who are in lost tribes in the middle of nowhere that have never heard about God or that kind of thing? Um, it's People are going to be judged essentially according to their knowledge. And yes, if you subscribe to the belief of Christianity, then you have to say, okay, there is that original sin. And because of that, I am not perfect. And though I strive for perfection, I know it's almost an attainable goal because in our eyes, there's only one person. I say our. It's a bad word. Uh, um, you have to take that on as your belief. But if you don't, there's nothing forcing you to do it. So it comes down to personal conviction. It's like if you feel so convicted that that is the outcome, if you don't believe, then that's something you have to reconcile personally.
Well, the thing that's forcing me to do it is the threat of eternal torture. Like, that's the coercion inherent in the proposition.
And it's I genuinely just I don't know how to answer that question besides if it does come down to a personal belief thing of me personally. I derive, yes, like my morals from like the Bible and also just like kind of like enlightenment theory, that kind of thing. Um, but yeah, like you do have to take that risk, and no, you didn't sign up for it, and it's not something that you can change. And is that okay? Is that not okay? That ultimately kind of comes down to you as a person to decide whether or not you feel that that's okay. And I'm going to be honest, like I don't like the fact, at least in what I see as a fact, that okay, humans are innately imperfect, and I do have to live with essentially the mark of sin. But I also know that I have the free will to decide whether or not I want to actually abide by that rule uh, and face that punishment or not. Just like, I mean, for instance, like no one should have to pay taxes, obviously. Um, but if you don't, you do take the risk, and it's always a risk versus reward kind of thing personally, and that's why it's not for everybody.
So
And
do you admit then, or acknowledge that you have an inconsistent set of moral rules? Like when you and I talk about the government, you know,
mm-hmm.
I'm sure you would agree, correct me if you don't,
Mm-hmm.
that the government is evil because it threatens and initiates force on us without our consent to its rules. And so if the government is immoral or evil for doing that, then how is your God not also immoral or evil for doing that same thing?
Because there is a way out. Like there is an alternative.
Well, there's with
And
the government too. Pay your taxes. You won't go to jail. You won't get shot. You won't get threatened. Nothing bad will happen to you as long as you pay your taxes. So is the government now good?
no, because fundamentally, so at least like I said, like in what's considered like anarcho-Christian beliefs, it comes down to a very simple statement. Um, and the statement is there's no king but Christ. At least in your like your personal life. Like this the state shouldn't have any control of you. It's like you've taken on this belief and you've taken on the burden associated with this belief. That you were gonna do your best to live the teachings of Christ, not like the Old Testament law, because Christ, with him dying on the cross and basically absolving our sins, that did away with that Old Testament law that comes from the Jews and like that kind of thing. So me personally, I believe that okay, if I see that Christ is the king of my life, that should be the only thing that I should abide by. I shouldn't force it on somebody or anything like that. But I shouldn't worship the state. I shouldn't see man's law and be like, yes, that is something I should follow, because it's not. Um, Especially in the cases of things that are inherently contradictory uh, to my personal belief. Um, and I do hold uh, my beliefs to be true, and I do see in my mind what is moral good. Uh, I'm not going to argue that someone is going to say, "Hey, I didn't sign up for this, so like this quote unquote social contract," and that's completely true. Like you didn't. Um, but like I said, it's not forced upon you. And yes, you can say that, "Hey, but because of this, I'm going to be tortured forever." Again, that is it's kind of losing the topic, to be honest with you. But
So, what I'm hearing,
mm,
and I'm not Kathy Newmaning you, I'm trying to honestly restate what I'm getting from you, is that you believe that you don't own yourself. You are rightfully, justly owned by this deity, and he can do whatever he wants with you. He can make whatever rules he wants for you, and you have no say in that. And I mean, just to put an edgy label on it, that's slavery. You are owned as a slave and subject to your master's rules. And that seems wholly contradictory with voluntarism, that you would sort of accept that. And the second part, the part two of that is, not only would you accept that, but you also at the same time, out of the same mouth, say that your God is good. This slave-owning deity is good. You know, he... I'm sorry. Tell me if I got you wrong. I'm not trying to Kathy Newman you.
yeah, no, yes, yes, yes and no, because on the topic of that you were a slave, absolutely not. Like you chose whether or not to believe in that, and if you choose not to, that is completely up to you. I just personally believe that, okay, this is something that I follow, and as long as I follow the actual teachings of Christ, then I'm not going to hurt somebody.
Okay, so maybe I've
And
been misunderstanding. So if I don't believe, then I'm not going to be subjected to those punishments and that torture.
so I didn't say that.
Okay, well then
But
please stop talking about, like, if I choose to believe something, how that changes anything, because it doesn't. Like, if I don't believe and I'm still subject to the rules, then what I believe is immaterial, right?
Yeah, yeah. So, and then just on the topic of
Sorry to interrupt. Yeah,
no. It's honestly it's a very valid point. It's something that, as I kind of grow and mature and kind of in voluntarism, it's one of those things that I try my best to reconcile with what I believe to be true, um, in my own personal life. And there's things that I personally haven't reconciled, that I'm iffy on, and I seek for clarification on, and I try to study more. Um, but do I believe that I am a slave because of it? No. Just how a person who follows any kind of moral path in life isn't a slave to it. It's something that they chose. Just how a person can choose to, like you say on the island, be a good moral person or a bad moral person, like that kind of thing. I personally don't see myself as a slave. I see myself as having free will, because I was created with free will. Now I have
Well, let's step through it, if you don't mind. Can we step through the slave argument? So let's start with the definitions. How would you define a slave?
So I would personally define a slave as someone who is owned by someone without their free will, without basically having that consent. And I know that ties into your argument of, well, that social contract of, well, I never had a say in this, so why am I held to that standard? And I would see someone who's a slave as they might want freedom, but they're forced away from that freedom. They don't have the option of making that choice for themselves. They don't have any kind of free will because of something being forced upon them that is out of their control, which I know is going to seem contradictory. And in some ways, it kind of is to what you would believe as a Christian if you believe that, you look to a higher power.
So we agree on the definition of slavery as the non-consensual claim of ownership over a human. Like we agree there. And so what is ownership to you? I'll give you my definition and you can tell me if you agree. A claim of ownership over something is a claim of the right to, create, destroy, and exclude others from using a thing. It would seem to me that we have all of the ingredients necessary to justify my claim that it's slavery. We have a claim of ownership over you in the form of a set of rules and control over your body property that you did not consent to, backed up by violent punishments and threats. All the ingredients are there. How are you then, accepting those things and then saying it's not slavery?
So it's kind of just thinking about it, kind of just mad on a little bit.
Yeah, no rush.
Yeah,
and if you want to pause, like we've hit like 100 really deep topics in the short time we've been talking. If you want to hit pause and we can pick this up another day after you've had time to think it all over. There's no pressure here.
Yeah, and I honestly would like to kind of go back up and just kind of understand, because you've raised a lot of points where it's kind of, okay, how do I look at things, like how do I view my personal faith? And just on that note, me personally, I don't think that you can believe in something without testing your faith. And I think that's a very important thing to do, to not blindly believe in something.
That is admirable and rational. Absolutely.
Because, there might come a day where I don't believe. Personally, like I would like to think that wouldn't happen. And I would like to think that, at least to my best knowledge, the guide of my life and kind of like the way I live my life, I'm on the right path. If I find something that is innately contradictory to everything I believe, then I have to really step back and take a look at myself and rethink a lot of what I believe. And one of, just in my personal opinion, I don't believe enough Christians do that. I think there's a lot of blind faith, and I think there's a lot of misguided faith on what people do and don't believe.
Yeah, for sure. Okay.
My biggest point.
Sorry, go ahead.
My biggest thing is less so if you like, it's honestly kind of my overarching argument to like the whole situation of, if you don't believe it to be true, you have nothing to fear. Because, yes, I might believe differently, but you don't have that belief. And whether or not your belief is true, or whether or not my belief is true, we're bound to our beliefs. Just how like you say, if you are basically putting yourself in this situation to basically be a believer, are you not a slave? And by that point, I would say it's not slavery in the fact that you choose, but also by that same point, in my personal opinion, and correct me if I'm wrong, wouldn't everyone be a slave to their own individual morals and to their conscience in some way or another? Because things like coercion, like pedophilia, murder, like those kind of things, we as voluntarists all hold those things to be, I mean, unabashedly, like, just completely evil, and not something that we would ever want to do to somebody.
Well,
So
you got to give it to me in smaller pieces so I can respond to each thing, because there's a lot in there. No, you can't be a slave to your morals, because morals don't exist. They're concepts. They can't own you as property. So I would say that's an equivocation. We're taking, something, an entity, a being, a sentient being that you say exists and that I claim enslaves you, and assigning those same characteristics to a concept called morals. I don't think that's a valid association. And the second thing I wanted to reply to in there was, again, I mean, I think I'm repeating myself on this point now. If I don't believe and I'm still subjected to the same punishments and threats and violence, then the belief element is immaterial to this discussion. Also, and I guess part two of that second one is that if you're walking down an alley and a thief walks up and puts a gun to your head and says, "Give me your wallet," and let's just say that you're insane and you consensually hand him your wallet, and therefore claim that it wasn't actually theft and he wasn't a thief because you consented. Number one, consent in that situation where there's already a threat in progress, consent is unknowable, probably even to yourself. Like with a gun to your head, you probably couldn't know your own mind clearly enough to know if you actually consented to handing your wallet over or not. Second of all, certainly no one on the outside looking at that situation could have any idea whether or not you actually consented or not. In fact, anytime there's threat or force involved in a situation, the true state of consent is unknowable. It's sort of like it's just nullified by threats and force, and I'm sure that you would agree with that. So I think the part of what you said where, well, I choose to believe, therefore I consent to the rules, therefore it's consensual. I think that doesn't follow for the same reason that once a thief has a gun pointed at your head, you can say, "Oh, I consent to this all you want," but sorry, that gun was already pointed at your head. I'm not sure that you can even say that you consent to it. And sorry, that hellfire was already cooking underneath you. I'm not really sure that you can say you consent,
Yeah, and the way I would essentially argue against that is the same way I would argue against that we are slaves to God. The belief is that we're not a slave to God, we're a slave to sin. That's why we are imperfect. That is why there is a hell. Like that is why there is evil and like torture in the world. And
can evil own property?
No.
Then no one can be a slave to evil.
Well,
we're equivocating on this word slave.
Yeah. So, what it is, it's like when you say slaves to sin is essentially being a slave to what, as Christians, we would see like the devil, like that kind of thing. Like it becomes almost kind of like a null point to a Christian to say, well, can evil own property? Because as we know it, like evil is essentially a concept. Just how good is a concept. But when you say that you're a slave to sin, you're a slave to that imperfection. You were essentially not forced to obey God, but you've been forced into this situation of, hey, there is evil in the world, and you are not perfect because of that evil. So what you are doing is, in order to free yourself from the slavery of what Christians will call sin, and that original sin, and to free yourself from the evil in the world, then that's how you get that. That's because you're not forced to live in sin your entire life. You have that option. So you are a slave to sin, and there's a way to change that, but you can also choose not to change that and face the consequences of that slavery. That's why.
I mean, you and I both agreed on the definition of slavery, and the way you're using it right now does not fit that definition at all. So I would ask, I mean, you can do what you want, but I would ask that you maybe find a different word, because you cannot be enslaved to a concept that according to our agreed upon definition of slavery, that doesn't follow.
Well, I'm going off. So it's Romans 6:20 through 22. And that's, yes, we have our like agreed upon definition of slavery, and the reason I'm using slave is because that's what's going. So to read it, it says, "For when you were the slaves of sin, you were free in regard to righteousness." One of the big points is that Paul kind of lumps us all together in this. So when we were once
hold on. I'm sorry to interrupt. I googled that verse. New International Version says, "But now that you have been set free from sin and have become slaves of God, the benefit you reap leads to holiness, and the result is eternal life." It literally says that.
No, yeah, you're not wrong. You're not wrong. And it's one of those things.
I rest my case.
You are choosing to go away from serving one thing and to serve another thing. Just how
slaves do not serve their master like consensually, right?
No, but
like the way you're using the word serve implies consent.
Yeah, it's
like my waiter serves me. That's consensual.
I
keep interrupting you. I apologize.
No, that was a funny. Me just being who I am, I view a lot of things as cartoon skits. So I think it's funny, just like the idea of like, Moses or like Ezekiel. Hey sir, how would you like this today? Like, but
don't get me started on Moses, man. Moses. What's the quote?
Yeah.
Ordered them to kill every male among the little ones and kill every woman who has known man by lying with him. But all the young girls who have not known man by lying with him, keep alive for yourselves. Good Lord. Oh my God. Yeah. It's like, kill a young girl's entire family before her eyes and then kidnap her and use her as a sex slave. Oh my God. Woo. Anyway.
Yeah.
I digress.
And again, that's why that, like, Christians, like in a mod, like interpretation, it's, hey, you are not bound to that law in any way. Like, you are not forced to do that. Like, there was a time that was, I mean, me personally, I don't think that is okay. Like, I'm never going to think that is an okay thing to do.
Good. Thank you.
But it's also one of,
I appreciate that.
It's also one of those things of I'm not Jewish, and I know it's like it's like well it's the same God, which
Yeah,
is true.
God ordered someone to do that at some time. How is that okay ever? It's the same God.
It's it's a thing of you have to, like I said, you have to wrestle with what you believe. Um, just how yes, it is the same God, and yes, you have to understand like what he said. Um, but me personally, I'm not even going to begin to try to comprehend uh, why someone or like anyone said anything. And do I think those things should be followed now? Absolutely not. Um, but I also believe that so living in that slavery and essentially, um, less so, we'll say not even slavery, because I mean, basically just being bound to something which is similar to slavery, but it's like you didn't choose to have this evil in the world, and you can choose to serve that evil, but you can also choose to not serve that evil.
I'm sorry.
Um,
This is who I am. I am annoyingly precise with language. Evil does not exist in the world, and you cannot serve a concept.
and that's where I would personally, to some point, agree that you can't serve a concept. Like I I can't serve what's a esoteric, like just like
Not
random
not only
sort of.
that, but not only that, but the people doing evil are not serving evil. Like they're not waking up in the morning and saying, "Wow, let's figure out what evil wants and serve it." Like, like it
Yeah,
doesn't even work in literal terms.
well, it's a thing of what you hold to be evil. So if you are essentially doing an evil act and doing what you consider to be evil, or what essentially is like biblically like considered to be evil, um, whether you wake up that morning or not and say, "Hey, I'm going to go be a bad person today," um, just because that's not what you're rationalizing doesn't mean that's not what you're doing. Essentially, like you can be an evil person. Um, you can also choose not to be an evil person. Just how a person can, choose to be a slave to the government and, for instance, like be a cop, like that, those kind of things. Um, you can be a slave to an evil act and you can live a life that is evil and immoral, but you can also choose to not live that way. Um, just how I don't think a lot of people wake up in the morning and say, I'm going to be a good person today, or I'm going to be an evil person today. It's what they do. And it's through your actions and your belief, um, that are going to guide that. So it's like you might not wake up and say, hey, I'm going to be an evil person. But if you go out and you just kill somebody and murder them, that's evil. And I think we would both agree that that is an evil thing. So if you are continually doing evil acts, uh, would you say that you aren't living an evil life? Just so if you're trying to do the morally right thing and doing good acts, you're doing your best to lead a good life.
So this might be a good
Mhm.
place to pause the conversation.
Mhm.
Let me, I guess, put a bookend on it, and then I'll let you have the
Yeah.
last word, and then we can pick it up another time if you want to.
Yeah, 100%.
So let me. So I guess my final thought to you would be just a call to action to really consider the non-consensual nature of the God you think that exists, control and dictates over your life, and consider if a good entity would do that to you. So that, I guess that's the last thing that I would want to say? Why don't you have the last word, and then we can pick this up another time if you want.
Yeah. And like I said, throughout the whole thing, you raised a lot of good points that I genuinely do wrestle with, and things that I want to go back, because, like I said from the get go, I'm not a theologian or anything like that, but I want to learn, and I feel by challenging what you believe is the same way, whether it's with religion or the lack thereof, whatever you believe, you should challenge those beliefs. And what I find very often, um, in kind of more of a literal and physical kind of realm, you would say, um, so often people justify their actions, and the state's actions through Christianity. And that's something that forcing yourself to be a tax slave, to be tax cattle, those kinds of things are wrong. And living a free life, whether or not you believe to follow, like you decided to follow a religion or to not follow one, you should do your best in life to never force that upon you, and you should never use that religion as a justification to violate someone's rights. And anytime someone does that, is completely antithetical to the actual belief in Christ. If you want to follow his example, you should actually follow his example by doing your best to help people where you can, but you should never be forced to help someone. You should do it out of the goodness of your heart. You should never be coerced in any kind of fashion. Because if you believe that you're, quote unquote, as you would say, like owned by God, if you like believe that and everything, then you should never try to make someone else have like that same ownership of you. And you shouldn't allow someone to have that ownership of you because you believe in something completely different, than any kind of rule of state, or any kind of violence that's wrongly perpetrated against you. But yeah, like, just to keep from rambling and to kind of cut this short, I'm going to go back and I'm going to really kind of dive in. And this has been eye-opening in a lot of ways. And in some ways, it's helped me to find new questions about what I believe, and also help me solidify other things that I believe. So I thank you for that. And
well, thank you for being thank you for being the type of person to have this kind of conversation, challenging your belief. I mean, I know it's common, and I know I said I'd give you the last word, so I'm not taking a last word on the topic that we discussed. This is a meta comment, right? So like, most voluntarists became voluntarists because they were brave enough to challenge what they believed about everything. And so it's cool that we're able to challenge other things that we believe in this way. And, I put myself out there on the daily to be challenged about everything. And so I appreciate that you're that type of person. Thanks for having the conversation with me. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, no problem. And just one last thing, you're absolutely right. If you don't challenge what you believe, you never actually agree. And whether that's a political thing, a personal thing, or a religious thing, you have to find that out for yourself. And I thank you for challenging me. And yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So just so it's on the record, I recorded this with your consent. Do you consent to me publishing this, or would you like to keep it private? I'll delete it if you would.
No, go for it. This gives me an opportunity to actually kind of, I guess, hold myself to the fire in a lot of ways, and really kind of force myself to look into things further. So yeah,
excellent.
I think it was honestly really productive in a lot of ways.
I think other people will find it helpful as well. So thank you for consenting to me publishing it. All right. Well, I will. I'm going to hop off here, and I'll be on Discord later this evening. So thanks again for the conversation.
Anytime, man.